Listen, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for hanging out with us today. And I want to tie the talk a little bit about motherhood into what we've been talking about the last several weeks. We've been in a message series, which means it's just a group of messages, sermons every week. And for the next several weeks, we'll actually be looking at conversations with Jesus. We're learning more about who Jesus is by looking at the conversations he has with people in the story of his life and ministry. Now, we see that in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are books of the Bible in the New Testament that talk about the life and ministry of Jesus. And so we're studying this together, and this morning we're going to talk about motherhood a little bit and tie that into some conversations Jesus has with Mary, his mother. And we've been studying who Jesus is, and so I want to look at this through that lens. As I mentioned earlier in one of my, in praying earlier, and even just as I opened the service, holidays can be really the best and worst times for some of us, for some of our lives. I think for some people, Mother's Day is maybe just one of the happiest days of the year. It's filled with so much joy. Filled with celebration. It's filled with making memories. I know some families do a Mother's Day brunch as a tradition. There's just a lot that we do on Mother's Day to really honor mothers, and it's right and it's fitting to do that. But it can also be, I think, for some others, a difficult day. The loss of a mother, or even the loss of a child, the desire and inability to have a child, other complications with raising children can really make Mother's Day a harder day for some of us to celebrate. And we feel that. We feel joy on the one hand for the great blessings we do experience, and we feel pain and hurt for some of the things that we have experienced as well. And so it's a day of mixed emotion. And I think for us there's a verse that's important as we remember to interact with other people. And it really encompasses the kind of thoughtful and considerate response we should have to one another, and it's really the kinds of people that I hope we can be at Anchor Church, the kind of family we can be, and the kind of environment we can have. It's Romans 12:15. In Romans 12:15, it says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep." As I process the truths of motherhood, as we celebrate our mothers today, I think I want us to remember a few things pertaining to that. We rejoice with those who rejoice, and some of us have reason to rejoice. And we also weep with those who weep because some of us also have reason to weep. And so I want us to be able to do that, in a sense, kind of meet each other in the middle, to really care for those who might be hurting and to really rejoice with those who might be celebrating. And I think for us, there are three truths that I share almost every year. These three truths are important for us to remember. And first is that mothers are worth celebrating. It is something that is worth celebrating. It's truly a wonderful calling. It's a great privilege. I think mothers are worth honoring, and this doesn't mean that you have to lavish them with expensive gifts, but I do think we have to, and we should take the opportunity to express gratitude to our wives and our mothers and to our friends who are wives and mothers. And I think the way that Paul would say it is we want to give honor to whom honor is due. Proverbs 31:31 is a verse that says, "Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates." We recognize that motherhood reflects the character and nature of God in really unique ways. We know God to be nurturing. We know him to be caring. We know him to be ever present. We know him to be life-giving, life-carrying, life-sustaining even, who holds all things together by the power of his hand. I could use that to define the way my wife holds our home together. She holds it together, and she does a great job, and many of our mothers are doing the same thing. It's hard work, but it's a picture of God's ability to care for us, to give us life, and to sustain our lives. And I think mothers and fathers share in many of these things. I really do think that it's not fair to say that women are the nurturers and that men are something other than that. I think that men and women both share in the ability and the call to nurture and to care for our children, no doubt about it. But there are things women can do. There's tons that they can do better, but there are things that they can do that men can't do. And I think some of these things pertain to just motherhood. Only a mother knows what it's like to have carried her child in the womb for almost a year of her life. And then to experience birth And then only a mother then would know, and not everyone gets the opportunity to nurse their child, but even for those who are able to do that, to provide life and sustenance for the child is something that I'll never experience, not in that way. And in a very real sense, that is a reflection of God's life-giving, life-carrying, life-sustaining work in our lives. He loves us that way. And I think this comparison of the process or the motherhood to God's life-giving, life-carrying, life-sustaining work in our lives is worth recognizing. It's worth celebrating. Then the second thing is that although Mother's Day it's worth celebrating, it's not a celebration for everyone. We've already mentioned that. But what I mean is that it's a wonderful calling, but not everyone's called to it. And it's a wonderful privilege, but not everyone gets to experience that. We'll always use Mother's Day as a chance to honor God, and we'll celebrate the many kids we have in our church, and we'll always want to remind parents of their calling to raise their children. But as I mentioned in the introduction, it's mixed emotions for us because we've experienced, some of us are experiencing empty nests, and some of us have experienced miscarriage, and some of us have experienced the loss of a mother, infertility, singleness, and other really difficult parenting scenarios. And I think instead of celebration and joy, the holiday can feel like a nagging reminder of all that we've lost or all that is lacking, and just a reminder of the struggle it is at times. And so what I want us to do is remember Romans 12:15. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. I think for those of us in celebration mode, I don't think we should be quiet about celebrating moms or sort of be withdrawn and make it not a celebration. What I would say is let's be sensitive to care for those who find it hard to celebrate. Let's invite them into their into our lives and into our celebration with us, and let's make them feel comfortable with us. Let's invite them to share in our joy for sure. And while we celebrate, we remember them, we pray for them, we even console them. Our friends who might need that. And then I think for those of us who find Mother's Day difficult, or if you find it hard to be a part of a church with 1,000 kids, we really do understand. We've heard that anyways from a number of others. And so we sympathize. And I say we understand, and the truth is, in some ways, maybe we can't. We want to acknowledge that. We ask you that, as I'm asking others to meet you in your pain, that you would meet others in their joy. That you would look past some of that hurt to see that God is working not only in your life, but also in the lives of your friends. And then I think that's what I meant earlier by meeting each other in the middle, if I can call it that. It's a healthy process that I think for us puts perspective on what's happening not only in our lives, but in the lives of people around us. And it's a healthy process that keeps our family and it keeps others in mind. And it frees us from the overwhelming or overbearing potential that self-centeredness can bring in our lives. And I think it reminds us to share what we're going through with others. So that said, I think I want to be sensitive toward each other in this. And then that brings me to a third point that I want to remind us. Motherhood is a reflection of our relationship with God. As we mentioned earlier, God is tender-hearted toward us. He cares for us. He gives us life and sustains our life. And so motherhood then as a reflection of our relationship with God means that our highest calling and our greatest privilege is that we are called to be His children. We are privileged to know Him as our Heavenly Father. This is a higher calling. It's a higher privilege than even motherhood itself. And I think that we've established motherhood's a wonderful thing, but not everyone's called to it. It's a great privilege, but not everyone is experiencing it. And it leads me to believe that as excellent as motherhood is, it's not our highest calling. It's not our greatest or most primary identity, even. The thing that defines each one of us at our core is that we belong to God. We are His children. He is our Father, and we are family. That's our greatest identity, that we belong to Him. And I think for us, I'm describing it as a primary identity as opposed to secondary identities because I think it can be helpful. Belonging to God as one of His children is our primary calling. It's our primary identity. Every other calling in our lives, every other role that you play is second to that. Does that make sense? So that's motherhood, that's fatherhood, that's husbandry, that's wifery. I don't know what you call it. That's sons and daughters, uncles and aunts. That's employee, employer, that's officer, that's enlisted. Every other status, every other role we play, when we play multiple roles in our lives, don't we? I'm a son, and I'm a father, and I'm a brother, and I'm a husband. I've got all of these different roles, and yet they seem to compete at times. But I don't think they have to. I think we actually can enjoy each of the roles that God gives us if we put them in right perspective, if they maintain a secondary status to our primary status as that of a child of God. And I think there, when the order is right, I think we find freedom to be all that God has for us in those secondary roles. So it's too easy for a secondary identity to become primary in our lives. It's too tempted to value a secondary identity or calling or one of these roles that I described. It's too easy to value one of those over the one who called us to those things. And I think what happens when we do that is that we begin to betray the purpose that for which God has called us to those secondary roles. In other words, we begin then to seek out validation from secondary roles. If it's motherhood, then our children begin to feel the weight of needing to bring us validation. Our correction of them is because we want other people's approval. We live vicariously through them at times. And so that's an example. I think you could take that through any of our roles, any of the roles that we play. If we place too much emphasis on them, if we see ourselves through the lens of a secondary identity and it becomes primary in our lives, then our relationships with others are skewed. We begin to derive ultimate meaning from sources other than our relationship with God. So ultimate satisfaction, ultimate significance comes from our children. That's too much weight for them to bear. Ultimate significance, ultimate satisfaction comes from our career path or education so we can pursue a career path. And that's too much weight for a job to bear. Not only will our idols come crushing underneath us, but we ourselves will fall under the weight of them when they crush and ourselves be injured. I think we have to keep in mind that our relationship with God is our primary identity, and every other role we play is second to that. And in that way, doesn't it feel like maybe I'm saying that you should be less of a mom or less of an employee or employer? No, not at all. What I'm saying is that we actually experience the fullness of all God intended in each of these secondary roles if we keep God as our primary identity, our relationship with God as our primary identity. In other words, I'm saying we're better moms when we understand that our future and our significance and our value and worth really doesn't rest on a good day or a bad day as a mom. Our significance and our value rests in our relationship with God, that He affirms us as His children, that we are validated because He loves us. He has sacrificed Himself in our place so that we will forever be accepted by God, and no one can take that away. So now we find freedom to be a really good mom. We find freedom to have a really bad day and not be condemning toward ourselves. Because what we know at the end of every good day and at the end of every bad day is that our primary identity is one that can never be shaken, and that is that I belong to God as one of His children. So this is good news for us, and I want us to see that. As I wrap up our time and move into the lesson here, I want to bring us to some conversations with Jesus that He has with His mother Mary. And let me say, can I say this real quickly in the next few minutes, that Mary is really a gift to all of us. She's maybe underestimated for people who might resist sort of how other people have overestimated her influence. So I would like to give her honor. Mary is just a really wonderful, wonderful young lady as God chooses her to actually carry the Messiah and bring Messiah into the world and even to nurture and sustain the life of our Messiah. So let me say Mary is a gift to us, and here's what she helps us to see today. There's just really three things. I think I can get through it somewhat quickly. There are three things that I think Mary helps us to see. Number one, it's this, that even if we were raising the perfect child, which, she had the benefit. If that's a benefit or not, I don't know. But she had the benefit of raising the only perfect child. So even if you were raising the perfect child, number one, you will still make mistakes. Number two, you'll still have to trust God. And number three, you'll still have to entrust these children to God. In other words, you'll still have to let go. They'll still have to come into their own someday. So those are the three things that I want us to remember. We learned this from the life of Mary. So let's look at this. One of the first conversations that Jesus has with his mother is found in Luke 2. So this is an early conversation, and I want you to see it in Luke chapter 2. Now, this is a conversation that we're having because Mary and Joseph have gone down to Jerusalem for an annual feast. And so they're there, as is their custom. And I want you to see what happens at this annual feast. So verse 41, if you'll read along with me, it's verse 41 of chapter 2 in Luke. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. When Jesus was 12, flip my page here. When Jesus was 12 years old, they attended the festival as usual, and after the celebration was over, they started home to Nazareth, but Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents didn't miss him at first because they assumed he was among the other travelers, but when he didn't show up that evening, they started looking for him among their other relatives and friends. So they've already traveled a solid day before they realize Jesus is missing. Doesn't that just make you feel better about yourself? So they travel a solid day, assuming Jesus must be with us somewhere. And then that night, as they get to settle in, I'm imagining, they're putting their tent together or whatever it is. And then I guess Joseph or maybe Mary, if it was anything like my relationship with my wife, it would have been Mary or Joanne who would have realized one of our children is missing. I would totally have neglected that. And I can actually see Mary saying, Joseph actually being responsible to track Jesus, and Mary saying, I thought you had an eye on him, and him saying, I did. I saw him. I'm sorry. I don't know where he is. That maybe that's a projection of an inward reality. Maybe that's actually happened to me, and I'm assuming that that's what happens to them. But it's true. I did lose our oldest boy at the Strawberry Festival 6 years ago, something like that. It was a really bad experience. Luckily, my wife doesn't know anything about it, so I was able to find him in less than 5 days, which is how long Jesus gets lost. Let's read the rest of the story. So they lose him. It's a day into this journey. All right, so we're already 1 day down, and Jesus, we don't even know what he's going to eat. What is he doing? Where is he? So they actually, when they see that he's not there, in verse 45, it says, when they couldn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem to search for him there. That's another day's journey. We're 2 days into this. We don't know where Jesus is. And then it says 3 days later, they finally discovered him in the temple, sitting among the religious teachers, listening to them and asking questions, and all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. 3 days later. That's 5 days. How hysterical would you be? I mean, they didn't have 911. There wasn't an all points bulletin where everyone's out on the lookout. We have no idea where he is. There's hundreds of thousands of people because it's a huge festival. And so it takes them 3 days to find Jesus. I think the reason I'm sharing that is because I imagine Mary to be quite disturbed or even frustrated with Joseph, with herself, even with Jesus, as we'll see the way that she responds to him. And I think one of the most comforting facts to me as I studied this was that even as a parent, even on our worst days, I didn't lose the Messiah for 5 days. I didn't let Jesus go. Can you imagine? I mean, that's when it dawned on me how significant this was. So God comes to Mary in a dream and says, Mary, you're going to have the Messiah. And I think the assumption here is you're going to keep a very close eye on this kid. We cannot let anything happen to the Messiah. And wow, they lost him. I mean, here's what I'm saying. Even if you were raising the perfect child, and don't we want that? Don't we wish that at times they would just do what we ask or just be what we want? And the truth is, even if our children were perfect, we would still have lots to learn. We'd still get it wrong. None of us are perfect. None of us are going to get it right every time. And what if raising children had as much to do with your maturity as theirs? What, what surprises me, I guess, really is that of all of God's creation, human beings are the most sophisticated, I might argue. And yet our offspring are the most dependent. You know, deer have babies and they walk within minutes. Like lesser creatures walk within minutes of birth. We're super sophisticated, and it takes 2 years at some. It takes years for us to just be potty trained. My goodness. I mean, so you can tell I'm right in the thick of like dealing with some of this. So all I'm saying is it's unbelievable that as sophisticated as we are, our offspring require so much attention. They are so dependent upon us, and it takes so long for them to really come into their own. You know, I think part of that, I can't say, for sure or with full authority, but I think part of that really is because that raising children really for us is to be instructive. It's to be sanctifying. Now, that's a word that means God is making us more like his son, Jesus. He's teaching us about who he is, and he's teaching us all the ways that we are not like him and all the ways that he is changing us, growing us, making us more like him. Doesn't raising children do that? And I think that's part of the point. So God has called some of us, some of you, he's called you to motherhood, and I think it's for as much as he wants to do in your heart as what he wants to do in the hearts of your children. Motherhood and any of the secondary roles that we talked about, any other role you have, any of these have the potential to make us more like Jesus if we'll let them, if we'll submit to that process. Which brings me to another point. Even if we were raising the perfect child, the first point is we'd still make mistakes. The second is that we would still have to trust God. Mary learns some things, not only here in Luke chapter 2, but in other conversations that she has with Jesus. And I want to finish the story. They couldn't find him. We're still in Luke chapter 2. Everyone who hears what Jesus is saying is amazed. And then in verse 48, his parents didn't know what to think. Son, his mother said to him, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been frantic. We've been searching for you everywhere. And Jesus says, why did you need to search? He said, don't you know that I must be in my father's house? But they didn't understand what he meant. Then he returned to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. And his mother stored all these things in her heart. It's that phrase there where she stored all these things in her heart. Mary's learning some things. She's learning to trust God. Jesus is instructing her that. I mean, that's kind of a backwards way of thinking about it, right? But I think our children do teach us things. We do learn from them, even if it's learning from our own mistakes. What Jesus basically tells Mary is that you really had nothing to be concerned about knowing who Jesus is. It's a special circumstance, but you know that I have to be about my Father's work. I have to be doing what God called me to do. And I think Mary stores that in her heart, realizing some things. First of all, I really do need to trust God to help raise this child. I really need to depend on God in raising this child. And I think not only that, I think that as she's learning this, she gets a glimpse of what it looks like to really just trust the Lord. She ponders, and one of the versions says that she ponders these things and treasures them in her heart. She's thinking about what Jesus said. She's thinking about what God has for her. And I think a lot of times if we'll actually, earlier when I said that any of these secondary roles, motherhood, fatherhood, the role we play on the job, the role we play in the neighborhood, any role that we have, the role we play in the family, any of these can be instructive. They can show us how we are to be more like Jesus. The reason I'm saying that, and the one of the ways I guess we would say that is that as we learn to trust the Lord, we're learning to hand over everything that really is or really could be primary in our lives and yield them to him. You know, we can't actually control the outcome of every conversation. We can't control the outcome of every situation or scenario. And if nothing else, aren't we being taught to relinquish control to the one who has control? We're not always going to have everyone's approval. We will certainly not always have our children's approval, but we may not even have other people's approval. And I think what we're learning here is the freedom found in seeking God's approval first and foremost. The third point, I think, real quickly, is that not only does Mary make mistakes, but also she's learning to trust God. And then I think another point here is that we have to, even if we were raising the perfect children, we have to let them go. We have to entrust them to God. And I think this is hard to do. I'm not there yet totally, but I mean, I am in some ways, and I think as our children grow, we grow in that as well. And it's easier to do that if our entire identity isn't built on our relationship with them. You know, just by way of an example, a lot of times in like post-marital counseling, not premarital, but like marital counseling, every now and then what happens is that I discover that one of the spouses is still too dependent upon their parents, still under their parents' control, still too under the influence of their parents' approval. And the scriptures teach, as God institutes marriage, that they are to leave their home or their family and to cleave to one another. And it's not just hard for children to do that. You know what I'm finding? It's as hard, if not more complicated, when parents can't do that. And so what I'm encouraging us to do is to see actually that God is in control, even in motherhood, and that it's a secondary identity. It won't last forever. Same as marriage, same as our jobs, same as our homes, same as anything else. It's one of those things that doesn't last forever. So we glean from it everything good, and we learn from it everything that are mistakes and sin and failure. And God, in the end, takes all of those and makes us more like his son, Jesus. That's my hope for us. I want us to celebrate. I want us to find freedom to celebrate. I want us to really rejoice with those who rejoice and even to weep with those who weep. I want us to see motherhood as something that's wonderful, but really only a shadow or a picture of just the relationship we have with God and his care for us. And here's what I really believe, that it'll make you a better mom, not a disengaged mom. It makes us better men and better women. It makes us better in relationships. It makes us better in every other role that we play if we can keep our primary identity as belonging to God and everything else second to that. There's freedom here, and there's lots we can learn. So as we close our time, the band's going to come up in just a second. As we close our time, I want just to encourage us, even with this example of Mary, but there's so much we could learn from Mary and the conversations that she has with Jesus. I challenge you, I encourage you, just go look at the conversations that Mary has with Jesus. But today what we're recognizing is that there is hardship that comes with motherhood. It's not the easiest thing in the world. But we also know that there's celebration that comes with it because it's a wonderful gift. It's a wonderful gift. It's a gift to mothers and children alike if they live in relationship, or the freedom that comes with the good news that Jesus provides. Have you ever received that good news? Should you be challenged in some way, maybe even now as you pray and prepare your heart to come for communion, maybe there's an opportunity for you to just challenge your own heart and ask, have any of these secondary identities become primary in my life? Am I really placing too much hope in this? Am I really experiencing the super highs and the super lows as it pertains to maybe my children or my job? If you're riding a constant emotional roller coaster, chances are you've set too much of your identity on that thing. The good news of Jesus has a way of leveling those kinds of things out. Because even on our best day, God is so good. And even on our worst days, we trust that he actually is still so good. And we are never forsaken. So that's my hope for us, that we live in true freedom. So will you follow him today? Maybe you've never really repented of that idolatry or making something else a god in your life. I would say turn from that today. Turn and embrace God as the true Lord of your life. Turn to him and embrace him as the Savior. Receive the good news of Jesus and find that freedom for you. You can find freedom from fears, from feelings of insecurity, feelings of insignificance. You can even find purpose for your life as you follow the Lord Jesus. You could find rest from the anxiety of not having a primary identity or feeling like you lack in some way. Your job or career can't do it. Your education can't do it. Your family can't do it. And no other relationship can do it for you. Nothing can bring you the rest and true freedom that following Jesus can. So will you follow him today? Let me pray as the band comes.